The air in Blackwater State Penitentiary, nestled deep within the unforgiving expanse of the Nevada desert, was a constant, abrasive symphony of metallic clangs, echoing shouts, and the low, guttural hum of institutional machinery. For Caleb Thorne, inmate 734. It was the soundtrack to a life unjustly stolen. He was a man of the earth, or had been, before the sterile concrete and cold steel walls had swallowed him whole. His hands, once calloused from honest labor, now bore the faint, indelible marks of prison life. He had been condemned for a sophisticated bank heist, a crime so meticulously executed that it seemed utterly beyond the capabilities of a man like him, a man whom the guards and many fellow inmates openly mocked as illiterate. His cell, a cramped rectangle of faded gray, offered little solace. The thin mattress on the concrete slab, the perpetually dripping faucet in the corner, the single, unblinking light bulb in the ceiling. These were the meager furnishings of his existence. Mornings began with the jarring clang of the cell block doors, followed by the shuffling of feet and the clatter of tin trays. Breakfast was a bland, indistinguishable paste, eaten in silence, punctuated by the occasional jeer from a passing guard or the knowing snicker of a fellow prisoner. Caleb rarely engaged. He would simply eat, his gaze steady, his silence often interpreted as dullness. Yet, beneath his rough exterior, Caleb possessed a profound, almost primal acuity. His eyes, though often downcast, missed nothing. The subtle shift in a guard's posture, the faint tremor in a fellow inmate's hand, the minute crack propagating across the concrete floor. Every detail was registered, processed, and filed away in the extraordinary visual memory of his mind. He couldn't read the words in a book, but he could read the nuances of a face, the unspoken language of fear or deceit, with chilling precision. His world was a constant stream of visual data, and he was an unparalleled interpreter of its unspoken codes. Evenings in Blackwater brought a semblance of quiet, though it was a fragile peace, easily shattered. The distant wail of a siren, the muffled shouts from another cell block, the intermittent glare of a patrolling searchlight. These were the constant reminders of his confinement. Caleb would often sit on his cot, hunched over a small, worn piece of laundry soap he had managed to squirrel away. With a sharpened pebble, he would meticulously carve intricate, seemingly meaningless symbols into its soft surface. These weren't random doodles. They were complex geometric patterns, interlocking shapes, and abstract designs that seemed to dance with a hidden logic. He would study them, turning the soap over and over in his hands, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. To anyone observing, it appeared to be the aimless pastime of a simple man, a prisoner whiling away the endless hours. But in reality, these were exercises for his extraordinary mind, a way of keeping his unique ability sharp, a whisper from a past he rarely spoke of. His father, a quiet, stoic man from the rural mountains of Appalachia, had been a master craftsman, renowned for his intricate wood carvings and quilt patterns. He had never learned to read a book, but he could read the grain of a tree, the flow of a river, the complex geometry of a spider's web. He had taught Caleb not through words, but through observation, through the careful study of shapes and the subtle shifts in light and shadow. The world is full of hidden languages, son, his father used to say, his gnarled fingers tracing a pattern on a piece of unfinished wood. Most folks only hear the shouting, but if you learn to truly see, you'll understand the whispers, and the whispers hold the deepest truths. This early teaching, dismissed by others as folksy wisdom, had forged Caleb's formidable visual intellect, a seed of mystery waiting for its moment to bloom. One sweltering afternoon, the oppressive heat of the Nevada desert permeating even the thick prison walls. A thin, rattling cough echoed from the cell across from Caleb's. It belonged to an old man, inmate 812, known simply as Pops. Pops was a relic of the prison system, a forgotten soul serving a life sentence for a crime no one remembered. He was frail, his skin like parchment, his eyes clouded with age and illness. Lately, his cough had grown worse, a wet, desperate sound that spoke of failing lungs. The guards, hardened by years of indifference, mostly ignored him, seeing him as just another mouth to feed, another statistic nearing its inevitable end. The other inmates, focused on their own survival, offered little more than a glance of pity. During the meager dinner service, a guard, Officer Jenkins, known for his particular brand of casual cruelty, deliberately pushed Pops's tray just out of reach, forcing the old man to strain painfully to retrieve it. Pops's hand trembled, his fork clattering to the floor. Jenkins merely snickered and walked away. A wave of silent fury washed over Caleb. It was a small act of malice, but it crystallized the dehumanizing brutality of their existence. Without a word, Caleb finished his own meal, leaving a significant portion of his already meager protein untouched. Later, when the cell doors were locked for the night and the lights dimmed, he waited until the patrol schedule confirmed Jenkins was on the far end of the block. Then, with the practiced stealth of a man who had mastered the subtle acoustics of the prison, he carefully slid his metal tray, with the untouched protein, across the floor, nudging it with his foot until it rested just outside Pops's cell door. He then made a soft, almost imperceptible scratching sound on his own bars, a signal he and Pops had developed. Pops, rousing weakly, shuffled to his door and saw the tray. His clouded eyes met Caleb's, and a faint, grateful smile, filled with a profound understanding, touched his lips. It was a simple act, a silent defiance of the system's cruelty, but it revealed the core of Caleb's character, a deep-seated compassion for the vulnerable, and a quiet integrity that no prison wall could contain. This was his save the cat moment, a small gesture that solidified his inherent goodness and made him worthy of rooting for. The next morning, Pops managed a weak nod of thanks during yard time, his eyes holding a new, knowing glint. Caleb simply nodded back, a silent understanding passing between them. He felt a quiet satisfaction, a small victory in a world that offered so few. His solitude, usually a source of quiet contemplation, now felt infused with a deeper purpose, a subtle reminder that even in the darkest places, human connection and compassion could forge unseen bonds. The world outside the prison walls might be oblivious to his existence, but within these confines, he was a silent guardian, a man of profound if unspoken depths, patiently observing, waiting, and unknowingly, preparing for the storm that was about to break. The fragile peace of Blackwater was shattered days later, not by the usual cacophony of a riot or a shakedown, but by the chilling quiet of a death. Pops, inmate 812. The old man Caleb had shared his meager meals with was found unresponsive in his cell. The infirmary guards, typically lethargic, moved with an unusual swiftness, but it was too late. His passing barely registered as a blip in the prison's daily log, another statistic in a system designed to forget. Caleb felt a dull ache in his chest. Pops was just a name to most, but to Caleb, he was a fleeting connection, a quiet reminder of shared humanity in a desolate place. As Pops's body was wheeled away on a gurney, shrouded in a thin sheet, Caleb saw it. Scratched onto the grimy concrete wall of Pops's cell, barely visible beneath a faded stain, was a single, intricate symbol. It wasn't a word, nor a common drawing. It was a complex, almost geometric design, reminiscent of the patterns Caleb's father had taught him to read in nature. It was the last thing Pops had seen, the last thing he had touched. Caleb's mind, accustomed to cataloging every visual detail, instinctively absorbed it. It looked like a stylized, broken chain, intertwined with a jagged arrow pointing downward. A shiver ran down his spine. This wasn't aimless doodling. This was a message, a desperate final communication from a man who knew he was dying, a man who had something vital to reveal. Moments later, the heavy thud of boots announced the arrival of Chief Guard Silas Vance. Silas was a man built for the prison system, broad-shouldered, with eyes as cold and gray as a winter sky, and a permanent sneer that suggested an innate disdain for humanity. He was a Type A, the villain, driven by an insatiable need for control and a chillingly casual approach to brutality. He ruled Blackwater with an iron fist, his authority absolute, his methods unquestioned. He cared nothing for justice or rehabilitation, only for order, obedience, and the carefully maintained facade of an efficient, secure institution. Silas strode into Pops's cell, his gaze sweeping the sparse interior. His eyes, sharper than most gave him credit for, immediately landed on the scratched symbol. A flicker of something. Recognition alarm crossed his face, quickly masked by his usual hardened expression. "Clean this cell!" Now Silas barked at two nearby guards, his voice cutting through the stillness. "Scrub it down. Every inch. Leave no trace." His eyes darted to Caleb's cell, a cold, calculating glint. He knew Caleb had been close to Pops. He knew Caleb had a way of seeing things others didn't, even if he couldn't read. The guards moved quickly, one of them already fetching a bucket and a brush. As they began to scrub, their movements rough and dismissive, Caleb felt a powerful surge of internal conflict. The symbol. He had only seen it for a moment, but it was burned into his extraordinary visual memory. It was cryptic, challenging, and undeniably significant. It was a personal plea from Pops, a silent challenge to Caleb's unique ability. But what did it mean? And why did Silas Vance want it gone so desperately? His instincts screamed at him to ignore it, to stay quiet, to retreat into his shell of perceived illiteracy and anonymity. He was a prisoner, an accused bank robber, serving a life sentence. What could he do? Intervening would mean drawing the attention of Silas Vance, inviting retribution that could make his already miserable existence unbearable. He thought of the solitary confinement cells, the beatings, the constant surveillance. He yearned for the quiet predictability of his daily routine, even within the confines of his cell. That was his ingrained desire for self-preservation, a longing to live out his sentence in the least painful way possible. But then, the image of Pops's dying gaze, that last desperate attempt to communicate, flashed in his mind, and his father's words, echoing like a forgotten melody. The biggest truths are whispered in the subtle shifts, the hidden currents. The symbol was a whisper, a plea for justice, perhaps even a key to his own wrongful conviction. Was he willing to let Pops's final truth be erased, just to preserve his own fragile peace? A powerful instinct to do what was right. A dormant defiance stirred within him, overriding his fear. This wasn't just about Pops. It was about the system that had imprisoned them both. The system that would crush any inconvenient truth. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that deciphering that symbol was not just a personal quest. It was a matter of survival. If Silas Vance was so desperate to erase it, it meant it held a secret that threatened Silas himself. And if it threatened Silas, it could be the key to exposing the corruption that permeated Blackwater, perhaps even the truth behind his own unjust imprisonment. That evening, during recreation time in the cramped yard, Caleb found a secluded corner. He picked up a small, smooth pebble and began to sketch the symbol onto the packed dirt, meticulously recreating every curve, every angle, every broken line from memory. The more he drew it, the more he analyzed its components, the more he felt a resonance with it, as if it were a visual language he was destined to understand. It wasn't alphabetical. It was spatial, relational, a code of shapes and forms that spoke directly to his unique visual intelligence. His initial attempts to decipher it were like trying to read a language without a dictionary. He rotated it, broke it down into its constituent elements, looked for symmetries, for patterns, for anomalies. The broken chain, he intuited, represented confinement, perhaps a system of injustice. The arrow pointing downward, to what a hidden path, a buried secret. As he worked, a shadow fell over him. It was Officer Jenkins, the same guard who had deliberately moved Pops's tray. Jenkins had a sly, observant quality, often missing nothing. He stood over Caleb, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the intricate drawing in the dirt. "What's that? 734, some kind of gang sign?" Jenkins sneered, a hint of suspicion in his voice. "Or are you trying to write a letter? Oh, that's right. You can't read. Can you? Just like a dumb animal." His words were laced with mockery, designed to shame and demean. Caleb simply looked up, his gaze steady, revealing nothing. He slowly wiped the symbol away with his foot, his expression blank. Jenkins scoffed, a satisfied smirk on his face. He thought he had dismissed a harmless, ignorant prisoner, but he had inadvertently confirmed Silas Vance's suspicions. Jenkins knew Caleb had been drawing something intricate. The next day, Caleb's already meager existence became harsher. His recreation time was cut. His cell was searched more frequently and more aggressively. His conversations with other inmates were monitored. Silas Vance began to appear more often, his cold gaze following Caleb's every move. Caleb was moved to a cell further away from the main block, in a more isolated wing, ostensibly for disciplinary reasons. He knew then. Silas suspected he was trying to decipher Pops's message. This wasn't just a random act of cruelty. This was a deliberate attempt to isolate him, to cut him off from any potential aid, and to prevent him from unraveling the secret. The subtle shift in the prison's routine, the heightened scrutiny, the chilling whispers from guards about his troublemaking behavior all confirmed it. This was the point of no return. Caleb's life, even within the confines of Blackwater, had fundamentally shifted. He could no longer simply exist, observing the patterns of light and shadow, carving his symbols in quiet anonymity. He was a target. The burden of Pops's last message, the weight of a deeper truth, now rested solely on his shoulders. He felt a chilling certainty he had to fully decipher that symbol, discover its meaning, and find a way to expose it. Not just for Pops, but for his own survival. His very life now depended on his ability to read what no one else could. The quiet before the storm had fully passed, replaced by the ominous rumble of an escalating personal war within the unforgiving walls of Blackwater. The stale air of Blackwater's general population cell block, typically a cacophony of shouts and idle chatter, seemed to hum with an undercurrent of tension. Caleb Thorne, now confined to a more isolated section, felt the subtle shift in the guards' gazes, the increased scrutiny that followed his every move. Silas Vance, the chief guard, moved through the block like a predator, his eyes often lingering on Caleb's cell, a silent, chilling promise of escalating torment. The message from Pops, etched into Caleb's mind, burned with newfound urgency. He needed to understand it, and he needed to do so before Silas Vance could break him. One sweltering afternoon, the iron gates clanged open, and a junior guard, fresh-faced and nervous, called Caleb's number. 734. Warden wants you in the common room. Participation is mandatory. Caleb felt a prickle of unease. Mandatory participation usually meant something humiliating, designed to break a prisoner's spirit. As he was escorted through the familiar corridors, he noticed a buzz of unusual activity in the common room. Folding tables had been set up, covered with strange, colorful objects. A small group of guards, including Silas Vance, stood near the front, their expressions a mixture of boredom and thinly veiled amusement. "All right. Gentlemen," Silas Vance's voice boomed, cutting through the low murmur of the gathered inmates. "Today, we're having a little educational exercise. To keep your minds sharp, or at least try to." A few inmates chuckled nervously. "We've got some puzzles here. Logic puzzles, pattern recognition, simple stuff. Whoever solves the most in the allotted time gets an extra ration of dessert tonight, and maybe a few hours off yard duties." Caleb's gaze swept over the tables. They were covered with various jigsaw puzzles, Rubik's cubes, and what appeared to be complex tangrams, geometric dissection puzzles. His eyes immediately landed on one particularly intricate tangram, its pieces depicting a highly abstract, almost cubist image. It was the kind of visual challenge that spoke directly to his unique talent. "All right, 734, you're up," Silas Vance barked, singling Caleb out with a smirk. "Come on up front. Let's see what that sharp mind of yours can do." His tone was dripping with sarcasm, a clear attempt to put Caleb on display, to highlight his perceived illiteracy and expected failure. This was Silas's way of asserting dominance, of reinforcing the narrative that Caleb was nothing more than a simpleton. This was Caleb's involuntary revelation. He didn't seek to boast, he was forced to perform. His innate ability now his only defense. A few inmates snickered, anticipating Caleb's struggle. Caleb walked slowly to the front, his gaze fixed on the tangram. He picked up the scattered pieces, his fingers brushing over their smooth wooden surfaces. He didn't consciously think about the puzzle's solution. His mind simply saw it. The pieces seemed to fit themselves together in his mind's eye, forming the complete image with startling clarity. It was as if the puzzle itself was speaking to him in a language of shapes and angles. He began to arrange the pieces, his movements fluid, almost effortless. He didn't hesitate, didn't fumble. Each piece clicked into place with an unnerving precision. The hushed murmurs of the inmates began to grow louder, morphing from mockery to bewildered fascination. Guards, who had been leaning against the walls, straightened up, their expressions shifting from boredom to genuine surprise. Silas Vance's mocking smile slowly evaporated, replaced by a tight, rigid frown. He watched, aghast, as Caleb, with a speed and accuracy that defied belief, completed the complex tangram puzzle in a fraction of the time it took the other inmates to even begin. Caleb simply pushed the completed puzzle forward, his face impassive, showing no triumph, just quiet completion. A stunned silence fell over the common room. No one had expected this. A low murmur, a mixture of awe and disbelief, swept through the prisoners. Among the astonished faces was a young inmate named Elijah Vance, inmate 917. Elijah, lean and wiry, with restless eyes and a quick, intelligent mind, was serving a relatively short sentence for an intricate cyber fraud scheme. He was a tech whiz, a master of digital codes and algorithms, but he was also a cynical observer of human nature. He had heard the rumors about Caleb's illiteracy and had privately scoffed at the older man, seeing him as just another uneducated brute. But as he watched Caleb effortlessly solve the puzzle, his initial contempt evaporated, replaced by a profound, almost unwilling respect. Elijah's mind, accustomed to seeing patterns in data streams, recognized a different kind of genius at work. He was the helper Ngoy Tro Giup. Caleb didn't know he needed a modern mind capable of recognizing a truly unique form of intelligence. Silas Vance, however, was incandescent with fury. Caleb had not just solved a puzzle, he had publicly shamed his chief tormentor. His carefully constructed narrative of Caleb's ineptitude had been shattered, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning with cold rage. "All right, that's enough. Puzzle time's over," he roared, his voice shaking the common room. He strode over to Caleb, his face inches from the prisoners. "You cheated. 734. You must have. Someone gave you the answer." His accusation was wild, baseless, born of pure disbelief and a desperate need to discredit Caleb. Caleb simply met his gaze, unflinching. "Get him out of here," Silas snarled, gesturing to two burly guards. "Transfer him to isolation block. See maximum lockdown. No contact. Effective immediately." His voice carried a chilling finality. This was the antagonist's action. Han Zhong Kua Pei Joy Jiao, a direct, brutal reprisal designed not just to punish Caleb, but to bury his emerging talent and, more importantly, to ensure he never came close to deciphering any other hidden messages. Silas would control the narrative of Caleb's cheating, isolating him completely. Caleb was roughly escorted out, the stunned silence of the inmates following him. He heard Elijah's voice, a surprised gasp, and then a frustrated curse under his breath. Elijah had seen it. He had witnessed the unveiling. Within hours, Caleb found himself in Isolation Block C, a desolate wing reserved for the most dangerous or intractable prisoners. His new cell was even smaller, colder, and darker than his previous one. No windows, no contact, just 4 stark walls and the constant, unnerving silence, broken only by the drip of a faucet. The food slot was grim, the rations minimal. It was designed to break a man's spirit, to crush him into submission. Silas Vance had ensured he was utterly cut off, a ghost in the machine. But as Caleb sat on his cot, the darkness slowly beginning to dissipate as his eyes adjusted, he felt a strange sense of clarity. The bitterness of his unjust punishment was there. Yes, but beneath it, a quiet resolve had solidified. Silas Vance had shown his hand, his fury, his desperate need to isolate Caleb. Confirmed it. Pops's symbol was important. It threatened Silas. And Caleb knew, with a certainty that transcended the cold, hard reality of his confinement, that he had glimpsed a truth that Silas was desperate to keep buried. His eyes scanned the walls of his new cell, already searching, dissecting. The surface was rough, scarred by countless marks left by generations of despairing inmates. But to Caleb's unique vision, they weren't random scratches. They were patterns, faint lines, subtle discolorations, minute chips in the concrete, the symbols he had carved into his piece of soap, the geometric patterns of his father's craftsmanship. They were all just pieces of a larger puzzle. He remembered Pops's dying symbol, the broken chain and the downward arrow. He remembered the specific angle of the scratch. As the days bled into one another in the timeless void of Isolation Block C, Caleb meticulously began to map his cell. He ran his fingers over every crack, every imperfection, his mind translating tactile information into visual data. He began to see the subtle shifts in the concrete texture, the minute variations in the paint, the barely visible patterns left by old water damage or long-removed fixtures. These were his new words, his new sentences. He began to etch new intricate symbols onto the wall with a loose pebble he'd found, connecting the observed patterns, building a mental tapestry of his surroundings. Silas Vance, observing Caleb through the peephole in his cell door, saw only a man slowly descending into madness, meticulously scratching nonsense onto the wall. He felt a grim satisfaction. He believed he had neutralized the threat, isolating the illiterate fool who had dared to challenge him. But he was wrong. Caleb wasn't going mad. He was unveiling a new, terrifying reality. He was beginning to read the prison itself, its hidden flaws, its secret language, seeing a pathway to the outside world, a way to expose the conspiracy that had put him there. The confrontation had confirmed his suspicions, and the isolation, meant to break him, had instead sharpened his focus, turning his cell into the ultimate, desperate classroom. The cold, relentless silence of Isolation Block C was supposed to be Caleb's undoing, a psychological vice designed to crush his spirit and extinguish any spark of defiance. Yet, in that oppressive stillness, Caleb found a strange kind of clarity. The absence of external stimuli amplified his already acute senses, allowing him to perceive the infinitesimal details of his confined world. His cell, a cube of unyielding concrete, became his canvas, his puzzle, and his ultimate test. This was his symbolic gauntlet, the arena where his unique intellect, so long ridiculed and dismissed, would either shatter or prove its worth. It was here, in the very heart of his confinement and humiliation, that his true fight for freedom would begin. The walls of his cell, scarred by decades of desperate hands and fading despair, were to the untrained eye nothing more than cracked plaster and peeling paint. But to Caleb, they were a tapestry of unintended information. He spent hours, days, perhaps weeks, time losing all meaning in the isolation, running his fingers over every rough patch, every hairline fracture, every subtle discoloration. He noted the way light, filtering faintly from a distant, grimy bulb in the corridor, cast shadows that shifted throughout the day, revealing new contours and hidden textures. He observed the patterns of condensation that formed and evaporated on the concrete, the faint trails left by insects, the minute variations in the sound of his own breathing echoing off the hard surfaces. His unique gift, that innate ability to read visual codes and patterns, intensified under the pressure of his isolation. He began to connect the seemingly random scratches left by previous inmates, seeing them not as vandalism, but as unconscious, fragmented communications. A series of parallel lines here, a faded circle there, a tiny, almost invisible chip in the paint that, when viewed from a specific angle, formed a recognizable shape. He saw the faint, almost ghostly imprint of where an old pipe or vent had once been, its outline providing a ghost image of the prison's underlying structure. The very prison itself, in its decay and neglect, was speaking to him, revealing its secrets in a language only he could understand. He meticulously sketched these observations onto the small piece of soap he still possessed, its surface now a miniature, ever-changing blueprint of his cell. He remembered Pops's dying symbol, the broken chain and the downward arrow. He began to overlay it onto these new observations, seeking resonance, seeking connection. The broken chain, he realized, wasn't just a symbol of confinement. It was a depiction of a structural weakness, a fault line, and the arrow. It pointed to a specific section of his cell wall, where an almost imperceptible hairline crack, previously dismissed as mere damage, suddenly looked like a seam. Caleb's solitude was profound, absolute. Silas Vance had ensured he was completely cut off. No visitors, no mail, no yard time with other inmates. Even the guards who delivered his meals rarely spoke, their faces impassive. He was a phantom, existing in a void. He knew that outside. Silas Vance was likely tightening his grip on the prison, perhaps even eliminating anyone who might have glimpsed the truth of Pops's message. Caleb was painfully aware that he was the only one left who could expose the conspiracy that had put him behind bars. The true story of the bank heist that had remained unsolved. The weight of this burden, the knowledge that he alone held the key, pressed down on him, amplifying his isolation. He felt an almost unbearable loneliness, surrounded by walls that mocked his very existence. Yet within that loneliness, his focus sharpened to an almost superhuman degree. The final piece of his chilling puzzle came through the prison's mundane sounds. He listened to the distinct rhythm of the ventilation system, the distant hum of the power generator, the subtle vibrations that traveled through the concrete floor. He correlated these sounds with the structural patterns he was mapping on his walls. He realized that the seam he had identified wasn't just a crack, it was a concealed access panel, designed for maintenance, long forgotten and bricked over. The ventilation shaft behind it, he deduced, led not to a dead end, but to a vast, intricate network of ducts and service tunnels that snaked beneath the entire prison. And Pops's arrow. It pointed not down into the earth, but through the wall, indicating the hidden access point and the path beyond. The broken chain was not a symbol of despair, but a visual instruction, a guide to breaking free. The pieces clicked into place, forming a complete, astonishingly detailed visual code, a map of the prison's hidden underbelly, a route to escape, and a chilling revelation of the sophisticated criminal network that operated both inside and outside Blackwater, a network that Silas Vance was clearly complicit in. The subtle anomalies in the original bank heist, which had always bothered Caleb during his trial, suddenly made horrifying sense when viewed through the lens of this hidden prison architecture. It wasn't just about escape, it was about vindication. Then came the news, delivered by a sneering guard through the food slot. Heard you're getting a transfer. 734. High security facility. Max. You'll be locked down for good. No more puzzles for you. The guard's words, intended to break him, instead ignited a furious spark of desperation. This was the ultimate time constraint. Silas Vance wasn't just isolating him. He was moving to erase him entirely, to bury him in a deeper, more permanent darkness where his insights could never see the light of day. Caleb had only a few days, maybe less, before his transfer. He had to act now. He had to crack the final code, find the precise sequence of actions to exploit the hidden access, and make his break. The intricate map he had deciphered from the walls, the sounds, and Pops's dying symbol now became a terrifyingly real escape plan. A race against the clock, against a system designed to swallow him whole. His life, and the truth, hung in the balance. The air in Caleb's cell, already heavy with the metallic tang of despair, now pulsed with a new, frantic energy. The guard's sneering announcement of his impending transfer to the maximum security facility had ignited a desperate fire within him. The meticulously deciphered visual code, once a theoretical map, was now his only lifeline. This was the climax, the moment everything converged, the impossible gamble for freedom and vindication. His cell, this very space of his torment, was about to become the crucible of his escape. Caleb moved with a quiet intensity, his actions precise and economical. He had no tools, only the ingenuity honed by years of observation and the raw determination of a man unjustly imprisoned. He scraped at the hairline crack in the concrete with the sharpened edge of his food tray, the faint rasping sound almost swallowed by the institutional hum of the prison. The crack, which he had identified as the hidden seam of the access panel, stubbornly resisted at first. His muscles ached, sweat beaded on his brow, but he pushed on, visualizing his father's steady hand, the precision of a master craftsman. He used his piece of soap, now almost translucent from repeated use, to rub away the accumulating dust, revealing the faint outline beneath. Each scrape, each minute displacement of concrete, was a step closer to the outside. He worked in desperate bursts, stopping abruptly whenever he heard the distant shuffle of a guard's boots, freezing in position, his breath held, his heart hammering against his ribs. The danger was immense. Discovery would mean brutal punishment, perhaps even the immediate transfer he so desperately sought to avoid. He knew the guards often peered through the peephole, looking for any sign of trouble, any deviation from the numbing routine. But his movements were almost imperceptible, blending into the background noise, a phantom in the silent block. After what felt like an eternity, a small section of the seam finally yielded, a thin, almost invisible fissure appearing. He pressed his fingers into it, testing its strength. It was thin enough to widen. He used the edge of his tray, then a sharpened toothbrush handle he had covertly modified, inserting it into the fissure and twisting, patiently, relentlessly. The concrete groaned, small pieces flaking off. Slowly, agonizingly, the seam widened, until a thin crack of deeper darkness appeared. He peered into it, his heart pounding. Beyond was not solid wall, but empty space. The ventilation shaft. He pulled at the edge of the panel. It was heavy, cemented in place. This was his Nintho bated breath moment, the point where all his efforts seemed destined to fail. He exerted all his strength, grunting with effort, his bare hands raw against the rough concrete. The panel didn't budge. Despair, cold and sharp, threatened to overwhelm him. He thought of the impending transfer, of being buried forever in a deeper, darker hole. He thought of Pops, his dying message, the truth that would be lost with him. Suddenly, a faint, rhythmic vibration reached him through the concrete floor. It was the distinct thrum of heavy machinery, the sound of the prison laundry room below. An idea, wild and desperate, sparked in his mind. He remembered seeing a structural support beam running through the back wall of his cell, a heavy, load-bearing concrete column. He knew that vibrations could exploit structural weaknesses. He quickly began to pound rhythmically on the hidden access panel with the butt of his clenched fist, timing his blows with the distant, low thrum of the machinery below. He envisioned the precise angle, the exact leverage point his father would have used. He poured his frustration, his desperation, his conviction into each blow. And then, with a deep, grinding groan that echoed through the small cell, the hidden panel shifted. A fine dust exploded from the seams, and with a final desperate heave, Caleb pulled it open. A rush of stale, cool air, smelling faintly of metal and dust, poured into the cell. Beyond the opening, a narrow, dark ventilation shaft stretched into the unknown. He had done it, slipping into the shaft. Caleb moved with an agility that belied his years of confinement. He navigated the cramped, twisting tunnels, his visual memory guiding him through the labyrinthine pathways. He saw the faint, specific markings. His internal map had predicted a bent support brace here, a discolored patch of pipe there, all confirming his deciphered route. He crawled past whirring fans, through narrow conduits, always following the intricate, unspoken directions that only he could read. He could hear the faint, muffled sounds of the prison above him, the distant shouts, the clanging of doors, but they felt remote, like sounds from another world. His escape route led him not to a direct outside wall, but to a maintenance hatch in an unused, almost forgotten section of the prison's exterior wall, disguised by decades of accumulated grime and overgrown scrub brush. He knew, from his deciphered map, that this hatch would be secured with a series of complex, old-fashioned latches, not electronic locks. He worked feverishly, his fingers scraping at the rusty mechanisms, turning the stiff bolts one by one, just as the final latch clicked open, revealing a sliver of the brilliant Nevada sunlight. A sudden, sharp voice echoed from behind him. "Freeze, 734. Don't move." Caleb froze, his heart seizing in his chest. Officer Jenkins. He had been so close. Despair, absolute and crushing, threatened to overwhelm him. Everything seemed to have failed. But then, a diversion. A sharp, metallic clatter echoed from inside the ventilation shaft, followed by a shouted curse. Jenkins, startled, spun around, his attention momentarily diverted by the noise. It was just enough. In that fleeting second, Caleb saw it, a small, intricately folded paper airplane, made from a page of a book, lying near Jenkins's feet. It had been launched from a higher vent, a desperate, last-minute distraction. Only one person could have done that. Elijah, the young tech wizard, his helper, had been watching, waiting, and had acted in that crucial moment. Caleb didn't hesitate. He burst through the hatch, tumbling onto the rough desert sand, gasping at the sudden rush of cool, fresh air. He scrambled to his feet, disoriented but free. He had emerged onto the desolate, rocky terrain just outside the outer perimeter fence of Blackwater, where a small, improvised press conference was being held. It was a bizarre, almost surreal scene. A handful of local reporters and a lone TV news van were gathered, their cameras pointed at the imposing, sun-baked walls of the penitentiary. Standing at a makeshift podium, radiating false confidence, was Chief Guard Silas Vance. He was speaking into a microphone, his voice dripping with practiced authority, boasting about the unparalleled security of Blackwater, dismissing recent rumors of internal corruption, and assuring the public of his total control over the inmate population, specifically mentioning the dangerous, disruptive influence of prisoner 734 Caleb Thorne, who will be transferred to an even more secure facility today. The camera lights were blinding, the reporters' questions a muted murmur against the vastness of the desert. And then, a gasp rippled through the small crowd. Heads turned, cameras swiveled. Caleb Thorne, disheveled, covered in dust and grime from the ventilation shaft, but undeniably there, stood blinking in the harsh sunlight, a living, breathing testament to Silas Vance's lies. His unexpected appearance caused an immediate, profound shockwave. Reporters, initially confused by the sudden emergence of a dirty, unkempt man from the desert, quickly realized who he was. Silas Vance's voice, mid-sentence, choked into silence. His face, moments ago smug and confident, went deathly pale. His eyes, fixed on Caleb, widened in pure, unadulterated terror. He knew. He was caught. Before Silas could react, a figure detached itself from the small crowd. It was Elijah, looking surprisingly composed, standing beside a woman with a serious, determined expression. A human rights lawyer Elijah had managed to contact from inside, leveraging his tech skills to send coded messages. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press," the lawyer's voice cut through the stunned silence, amplified by the news cameras. "This man, Caleb Thorne, is innocent, and he has just escaped from this impenetrable prison to expose a vast conspiracy of corruption within Blackwater, directly involving Chief Guard Silas Vance." A cacophony erupted. Microphones were thrust towards Caleb. Reporters shouted questions, their faces a mixture of disbelief and frantic excitement. Caleb, his voice hoarse but steady, stepped forward. "I was framed for the Blackwater Bank heist," he declared, his gaze fixed on the cameras, on the world beyond the prison walls. "And the real masterminds are not outside these walls, but inside. Their code is written in plain sight, for anyone who knows how to read it." He then, with chilling precision, began to recount the details of the bank heist that had put him behind bars. But he didn't use words or dates. He described the intricate visual cues he had deciphered from Pops's message and the prison walls, the specific, non-standard drill pattern on the vault door, matching a unique design etched into an old guard's locker, the coded timing of the internal alarms, represented by a series of faint, almost invisible scorch marks on a rarely used prison map in the warden's office, a detail Pops had clearly seen. He even described the subtle, distinctive gait of the mastermind, represented by a specific wear pattern on a floor tile in the main office, a pattern Silas Vance often paused on. He spoke not of text, but of textures, not of dates, but of angles, not of names, but of subtle visual signatures. He drew the patterns in the sand with his finger, illustrating the interconnectedness of the prison's layout with the bank heist details, revealing how the illiterate prisoner had seen the blueprint of the crime where trained investigators had seen only chaos. The reporters, initially bewildered by his visual explanations, slowly began to grasp the astonishing implication. They exchanged stunned glances, then turned their cameras to Silas Vance, who was now being quietly, but firmly, apprehended by federal agents who had arrived on the scene, alerted by Elijah's lawyer. The agents, armed with a warrant, had been discreetly verifying the lawyer's claims about Vance's involvement in a larger criminal ring. The transformation on the faces of the onlookers was profound, from confusion to dawning comprehension, then to outrage at Silas Vance's deception, and finally, to awe and profound admiration for Caleb Thorne. "He's not illiterate," someone shouted. "He's a genius." The applause began hesitantly, then swelled into a thunderous roar, a collective outpouring of relief and respect. "Justice, justice for Thorne," they chanted, his name echoing across the vast desert, no longer a prisoner's number, but a symbol of truth revealed. Caleb Thorne, the man mocked for his inability to read words, had just used his extraordinary visual intelligence to read the world, escape his unjust confinement, and achieve a profound vindication in the eyes of society. The image of Chief Guard Silas Vance being led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of utter defeat, became a viral sensation, splashed across every news channel and digital platform. The ensuing investigation, fueled by Caleb Thorne's detailed testimony, the meticulously preserved fragment of Pops's symbolic message, and the corroborating evidence provided by Elijah and his human rights lawyer, rapidly unraveled a far-reaching network of corruption that extended deep into the state's prison system and beyond. It was a meticulously planned operation. Silas Vance, driven by an insatiable hunger for power and wealth, had been secretly colluding with a ruthless organized crime syndicate that had orchestrated the Blackwater Bank heist. Vance had used his authority to obstruct investigations, manipulate evidence, and ultimately frame Caleb, a convenient patsy due to his perceived illiteracy and lack of connections. He had systematically turned Blackwater Penitentiary into his personal fiefdom, exploiting the inmates and using his position to facilitate other illicit activities, all while maintaining a facade of impenetrable security. The truth, when it finally emerged, was more shocking than anyone could have imagined. Vance, the Type A villain, lost everything. His career, built on a foundation of lies and brutality, crumbled into dust. He was formally stripped of his rank, publicly disgraced, and faced a battery of charges: conspiracy to commit grand larceny, obstruction of justice, abuse of power, and numerous counts of corruption. The evidence, painstakingly pieced together from Caleb's visual cues and the digital trails Elijah had secretly uncovered, was overwhelming. Silas Vance was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to a lengthy term in a maximum security federal prison. Ironically, a much more confined and austere environment than Blackwater. Justice, slow and hard-won, had finally delivered a fitting end to his reign of terror. The true masterminds of the Blackwater Bank heist, a shadowy syndicate known as the Serpent's Coil, were also implicated and swiftly apprehended, thanks to the leads Caleb's unique insights provided. Their intricate network of operations, built on coded communications and hidden visual signals, was systematically dismantled, sending shockwaves through the criminal underworld. For Caleb, the immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of legal proceedings and media attention. He was officially exonerated, his name cleared of all charges, his innocence publicly proclaimed. The state issued a formal apology, acknowledging the profound injustice he had suffered. He spent a few days in a quiet, anonymous safe house, slowly acclimatizing to a world that no longer had bars, guards, or the constant hum of oppression. The quiet was almost unsettling after years of constant noise. Amidst the legal triumphs, the opportunity that truly resonated with Caleb was presented by CipherSec Solutions, a leading private security and intelligence firm based in Phoenix, Arizona. CipherSec specialized in advanced data analysis, threat assessment, and, crucially, the decipherment of unconventional codes and patterns. Their CEO, a visionary woman named Dr. Lena Hansen, had been captivated by Caleb's story and his extraordinary ability. She approached him not with pity, but with profound professional respect. "Mr. Thorne," she had said during their first meeting in a discreet downtown office, her gaze direct and intelligent, "your ability to perceive and interpret visual codes, to see patterns where others see only chaos, is nothing short of revolutionary. Our world is increasingly driven by complex visual data, satellite imagery, surveillance feeds, even the subtle patterns used by sophisticated criminal networks. We believe you possess a gift that could redefine modern security and intelligence." Caleb was offered the position of Chief Visual Cryptography Analyst, a powerful and influential role. He would lead a specialized team, equipped with cutting-edge technology, tasked with solving complex cases, from counterterrorism to corporate espionage, all relying on his unique talent. This was more than just a job. It was a chance to transform his perceived illiteracy into an invaluable asset, to use his extraordinary mind for justice and public safety. It was the meaningful new opportunity he had unknowingly yearned for, a path to reclaim his dignity and purpose. Caleb accepted without hesitation. Weeks later, Caleb and Elijah met in a bustling, sunlit cafe in downtown Phoenix, a vibrant contrast to the sterile, confined spaces of Blackwater. Elijah had been released from prison early, his cooperation in exposing Silas Vance leading to a reduced sentence. He was working as a cybersecurity consultant for a nonprofit, helping at-risk youth learn ethical hacking skills. "Still feels weird, doesn't it?" Elijah remarked, sipping his iced tea, his eyes darting around the lively cafe. "Being out, no walls, no bells." Caleb nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Every morning, I still expect the clang of the cell block door, but then I smell coffee, not disinfectant." He looked at Elijah, his gaze softening. "I owe you, Elijah. You saved me. That paper airplane, that diversion, it bought me the seconds I needed." Elijah shrugged, a faint blush on his cheeks. "You were the one who gave me hope, Caleb. Showed me there was more to seeing than just what's on the surface. I judged you. You know, I saw your illiteracy as a weakness. I was wrong. Terribly wrong. You see things I never could, even with all my tech." His apology was genuine, born of profound respect and the humility of a man who had confronted his own prejudice. He had been a type B misguided, blinded by his own intellectual pride, but now truly repentant and appreciative. Caleb reached across the table, placing a hand on Elijah's arm. "We all have our blind spots. Elijah, it took a prison cell for me to truly see what I was capable of, and it took your courage to make that truth visible to the world." He paused, a thoughtful glint in his eyes. "Sometimes, the most profound insights come from the places we least expect them. And the most dangerous prisons aren't always made of steel and concrete." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the murmur of the cafe providing a gentle backdrop. Caleb felt a profound sense of peace. The storm of his past had cleared, replaced by a deep, quiet calm. He was free, vindicated, and his unique talent, once a source of mockery, was now his greatest strength. He was ready for the next chapter, ready to use his unseen language to protect others, to ensure that the whispers of truth would never again be silenced. 2 years melted into the vast expanse of the Arizona desert, each sunrise painting the mountains with a fresh promise of freedom. Caleb Thorne, once prisoner 734, had shed the last vestiges of his confinement, not just physically, but spiritually. He was no longer the illiterate man mocked by guards, but a figure of quiet authority, his intellect now widely recognized and deeply valued. His home, a modest but warmly appointed house nestled in the foothills outside Phoenix, offered breathtaking views of the sprawling landscape, a stark contrast to the unforgiving concrete walls that had once defined his world. He often spent his mornings on his porch, a mug of black coffee in hand, watching the desert awaken, tracing the intricate patterns of sunlight on the distant saguaros, a silent, mindful practice that mirrored his unique way of seeing. His work at CipherSec Solutions had blossomed. As Chief Visual Cryptography Analyst, Caleb led a specialized division that had become legendary within the security industry. His team, a diverse group of former law enforcement, data scientists, and even artists, worked on high-stakes cases that conventional methods couldn't crack. They deciphered coded messages hidden in urban graffiti, revealed complex patterns in surveillance footage that hinted at terrorist plots, and even uncovered intricate schemes embedded in seemingly innocuous architectural blueprints used by international smuggling rings. His ability to read the world in shapes, shadows, and subtle irregularities was now a groundbreaking tool in the fight against crime. He had found his true calling, a purpose that not only leveraged his extraordinary talent, but also honored the memory of his father and the silent plea of Pops. His life was no longer defined by solitude, though he still cherished moments of quiet contemplation. He had cultivated genuine, trusting relationships with his colleagues, particularly with Dr. Lena Hansen, CipherSec's CEO, who remained a steadfast advocate for his unique abilities. He often took long hikes in the desert, accompanied by a rescue coyote mix he'd adopted, named Echo, whose keen senses and silent companionship mirrored Caleb's own watchful nature. He continued to carve intricate symbols into soapstone and wood, not out of necessity, but out of a pure, joyful expression of his freed mind, his hands crafting patterns that now spoke of beauty and liberation. But Caleb knew his journey was not solely about personal triumph. He understood, more deeply than most, the profound injustice of being underestimated, of having one's truth dismissed because it didn't fit conventional molds. He remembered the sting of the illiterate label, the weight of a system that only valued what it could easily define. This understanding fueled his drive to pay it forward, to extend the reach of his unique insights beyond the confines of CipherSec. He established the Unseen Language Project, a nonprofit foundation dedicated to fostering unconventional intelligence and visual literacy. The project aimed to bridge the gap between traditional forms of knowledge and the often overlooked power of pattern recognition. He organized workshops for law enforcement agencies across the country, training officers and detectives to identify and interpret non-traditional visual codes. From subtle gang markings to the complex visual signals used in cybercrime and human trafficking. He taught them to read between the lines of a crime scene, to see the story hidden in the seemingly random. The project also reached into inner-city communities and juvenile detention centers. Caleb believed in the inherent brilliance of every individual, regardless of their background or formal education. He ran programs for at-risk youth, particularly those who struggled with traditional literacy but possessed keen observational skills. He taught them basic principles of visual analysis, showing them how to find patterns in their urban environments, how to think critically about images, and how to use their unique perspectives as a source of strength. He spoke about his own journey, emphasizing that true intelligence manifested in many forms, and that the greatest power lay in understanding the world in ways others couldn't. "Your eyes are your most powerful tools," he would tell them, his voice calm and resonant. "Learn to truly see, and you will find your own language, your own path to freedom." He became a sought-after speaker, invited to national conferences on criminal justice reform and educational innovation. His story, once a whispered rumor within prison walls, was now a powerful testament to resilience and the extraordinary capabilities of the human mind. He carried no bitterness, only a profound sense of purpose. One serene evening, as the Arizona sky bled from fiery orange to soft violet, Caleb stood on a low mesa overlooking the sprawling desert. In his hand, he held a small, polished piece of soapstone. Carved meticulously into its surface was a complex, interlocking pattern, a fusion of Pops's dying symbol, his father's intricate designs, and his own unique flourishes. It was a masterpiece of visual cryptography, a narrative in stone, comprehensible only to those who truly knew how to see. The last rays of the sun caught the edges of the carving, making the symbols shimmer, an iconic final image that perfectly encapsulated his journey. In the distance, the faint glow of Phoenix's city lights pulsed against the darkening horizon, a reminder of the world he now protected, not with a badge or a gun, but with the unparalleled vision of his own unique mind. He smiled, a quiet, profound smile. He was free, he was seen, and his unseen language was finally speaking volumes. If this story stirred your heart, if it reminds you that courage can alter destinies, and that light always finds a path even in the deepest darkness, please leave a comment. Share this story with those who need inspiration. Like, subscribe, and hit the bell to never miss our upcoming stories.